want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, Brandflex here, back with a new Granblue Fantasy Relink video. For today's video, I want to talk about the new patch and what it means for a captain, whether it was good or bad, or any other small things we want to do, and talk about the new sigils and my personal goal with farming them. I don't have the most time in the world, unfortunately, because of a full-time job, so I haven't quite gone all the sigil farming in, but I figured that people would probably like to know my opinion on it sooner rather than later, because it'll probably take me a week or two to farm up where I need to be to make a cohesive video on it. And yeah, with all that said, I'll go ahead and start loading up some Lucilius gameplay in the background that I did on stream. It was a pretty good run with my bots, so I'm pretty happy with it. But anyways, with all that said, if you're here for the very, very short version of this video, basically my opinion on the captain is that they are still totally viable. They are still very good in the damage department, courtesy of being the singular character that still has the rotor bug intact in their kit. Unfortunately, their SBA generation has been very heavily hit, so if you're playing captain as a SBA bot or an SBA starter in your team comps, that is no longer a viable strategy for the captain. Unfortunately, you will need to be probably the third or fourth caster in that rotation. So with all that said and done, we can get into the, I guess, more in-depth talk about what happened to the captain. If you guys haven't read the patch notes, I'll try and very briefly and vaguely go over it. I forgot to pull it up for this video, but I have them mostly in my head, and basically the captain is probably the only character that has gotten a severe actual gameplay mechanics change. You can say that characters like Fairy and Rakam got some pretty severe mechanics changes because they got their main damage source removed, or their main playstyle adjusted very heavily, but captain is the only character in the game that actually got their mechanics adjusted, like numbers wise and effects wise. So basically, if you guys remember what the captain did before, the arch duration would start falling off the moment you cast an ability, and essentially outside of having a link attack to extend it by 3 seconds, you would have 6 seconds to fit all of your abilities into your arch 4 duration until it fell back to 1, and then you have to recast or rebuild your arts up to max. So that has been changed now, and now you can perpetually, is that the right word? You can permanently rather keep your arts level up as long as you're hitting a finisher. So whether that's, well, the finishers are basically like, you know, your power raise plus, power raise plus plus, or any auto attack combo that increased your arts level by 1, or the link attack itself. All that now refreshes your arch duration to being another 6 seconds. So now you can keep your arch duration at 4 permanently, which does affect your build a good amount, and also affects your playstyle a lot, because now that actually does open up some better builds, or rather different builds for captain. Because in the past, you couldn't really run slower casting abilities like the heal, phalanx, and other stuff, because by the time you casted all of them, your arts would drop back down to 1, and that would suck because you'd have these super long cooldown abilities that you'd want to cast as soon as possible, but you couldn't cast them that fast because you took too long to cast, and the boss interrupted you, you had to cancel the cast, and then arts fell off, and you'd be like, well, I don't want to cast phalanx at arts level 1, blah blah blah. That way of playing is now way better. Unfortunately, this does hit the quote-unquote optimal DPS captain builds that would try and build up to arts 4 as quickly as possible, with the arts duration already ticking down, and then pumping all of your abilities in that short 3-second duration, and then immediately building it back up from 1, and then repeating that cycle over and over again, which was admittedly a pretty high skill cap way of playing the captain, and it was very engaging, but I don't necessarily blame Side Games for removing that, because that was such a high PM way of playing the game. And it was very mechanically intensive for someone who's supposed to be a beginner character. I think unfortunately the captain is still pretty intensive when it comes to mechanics and combos because of how close range she is. And fortunately we do have ways to build around that, but we'll get into that as we talk about the build later on in the video. So obviously with the arts level no longer dropping down to 1, they had to adjust the captain's hidden passive and fearless drive to account for the fact that you can no longer build your arts back up. So first of all, yes, thankfully they did change the hidden passive to not be adjusted by FPS anymore. Unfortunately, what this means is that now it's the 120 FPS captain's refund, and not the 30 FPS captain's refund. So when you're building your arts level up, or you're hitting a refresh on your arts duration, you're only getting -1 second per proc instead of the -2.5, the -2 that we saw on 30 FPS on captain. So a bit of a nerf there, but thankfully we can now play on a silky smooth 120 FPS or 60 FPS without feeling bad about our frame rates being suboptimal to get better gameplay, right? And so, along with that, Fearless Drive has been adjusted to having its values nerfed a pretty good amount, but obviously that's because they don't want you proccing the, what was it, like 4% reduction over and over again. Now we're just getting a 2% reduction, which also kind of sucks, but it is technically better value in the long run because you no longer have to drop from 1, and if you're playing quickly and you're hitting your Arts 4 finishers over and over again, you do continue to get that cooldown refresh a bit quicker than usual. So all in all, what this means is that the captain has significantly longer cooldowns generically, but they're going to be much more even, and they'll make more sense no matter what your settings are, essentially. And so what else was there? So the rotor bug, obviously as mentioned earlier, still is not fixed at all. That was missed on the captain, but what was nerfed on the captain was the SBA generation, and essentially the math that I've been given is that if you had uplift 45 in the past as captain, now that uplift 45 is essentially giving you what you had at uplift 0 this patch, something like that. Essentially, we lost 30% of our SBA gain across the board. Stuff like Arrow Rain still has it, or Rain of Arrows rather. The Rain of Arrows is a pretty suboptimal skill and not very popular. All of our auto combos, Reagan Leave, Decimate, all those skills got hit very, very hard, and you'll notice that in the gameplay. And right about here, I'm going to post a minute-long video of me doing a parse against the dummy, and you'll see that my damage is still very, very good, again, because the rotor bug isn't fixed. But you'll notice that at the very end, I will still have about 5% left to the SBA, whereas in last patch, I would have been at the SBA 100% long before at the end of the minute. And that's a huge deal because I still have uplift 16, or is it uplift 15? It might have been an underleveled uplift sigil, but I do have an uplift sigil on during this gameplay. So that means that I'm not running at uplift 0, but I'm still not making it to 100% SBA gauge in 1 minute with 100% uptime on a dummy. So what we have to do instead is have to rely on stuff like Nimble Onslaught to artificially build our gauge outside of our auto combo, which really sucks, but you know, it is what it is. So going past what happened to the captain and those changes, what I recommend for the captain nowadays for builds is probably more of the same. We are still working around the rotor cap, and we're still working around making sure that our rotor bug is still as high as possible, so you can still run the exact same build you did last patch. But if for some reason you want to run with the Fa sigils, or the Lucilius sigils rather, kept saying Fa because that's how the JP players call him, we can run a singular Gamma sigil, and I haven't had the time to totally farm all the Fa sigils and level up myself, so take this with a grain of salt if you have way more time than me and you've been able to farm up. But the reason why I think the Fa sigils are very suboptimal is because, once again, we are relying on the rotor bug for the vast majority of our damage in our burst phase to burst phase combos, and so because of that, what the Fa sigils do is that they increase the cap of even the rotor bug, but since we were already struggling to hit the rotor bug to begin with, it's actually kind of unintuitive to run it, because if you're already struggling to hit that cap, then what's the point of increasing that cap, right? So the singular Gamma is more for everything around your rotor bug. Unless you're already capping on your rotor bug, then you're also increasing that by a decent amount. But we're not going overboard, because in actual gameplay, the issue with the Fa sigil is that it heavily cuts down on your utility. And as I mentioned earlier, the captain now has to rely on stuff like Nimble Onslaught to actually have enough SBA generation to keep up with everyone. And so in my Lucilius run, since I'm, kind of doing a handicap on myself and using flight over fight to make my gameplay easier, because I'll be honest, I don't have the energy or attention span when I'm doing this fight over and over again to learn how to perfect dodge it properly. When I'm back home from work, I just want to vibe and listen to music, watch a show, and do Lucilius without worrying about wiping, so I put flight over fight on there. And you'll see in the gameplay, you might notice rather in the gameplay behind in the background, that my SBA generation is still pretty on par with my bots, and my bots also have Nimble Onslaught. They also have way higher uplift, and obviously bots aren't quite going to be, optimizing their SBA rotations as much as humans will be in your co-op games. But the fact that even with 30% lower SBA generation in a quote-unquote real scenario, where obviously I'm running flight over fight to really artificially increase my perfect dodge rates, I still am kind of keeping up, is a decent sign. So really, if you're a skilled player, obviously someone way better than me will cut out flight over fight and then put another supplementary damage into their grid, and they'll be really good with that, and they'll still have very good SPA generation. And you can have the argument that maybe we shouldn't have to be this good to have just equal SPA generation to the rest of the crew, but it's kind of the reality we live in. Again, we still have the rotor bug, which makes us probably top DPS in most generic damage scenarios, so it's just a trade-off you get for playing this character now. And yeah, what else was there? So my current setup, again, on Lucilius is running Flight over Fight just to make my life easier. You'll notice that I've taken off a lot of my supplementary damage sigils, and this is less about what happened to the captain in this patch and more how my grid philosophy has changed over time. But I'm starting to think that we should be going wide as a captain instead of condensing everything into one kind of trait. So you'll see that I'm running one QCD, I'm running one Nimble Onslaught, I'm running one Uplift, one supplementary damage, one Gamma. And the reason why I'm running a singular copy of all of these is because in my head I'm thinking like, okay, we have Sigil Booster. A lot of these sigils, while they are quite powerful at the very end, most of them have very good scaling for at least the very first sigil slot. And if we're trying to run the Fa sigils, in this case my singular Gamma sigil, I'm going to want it to cover as much utility as possible, because if you didn't know, the Uplift SBA generation does actually affect the Nimble Onslaught generation increase, so you actually get kind of a refund on the Nimble Onslaught from Uplift. So not only do you get the Uplift generation on the rest of your kit, you also get the kind of like coping mechanism with Nimble Onslaught, because obviously 2 Nimble Onslaughts is super good, but we're trying to go wide, and if we're running Fa, we're running Flight over Fight with no plus sigil, we're still trying to fit in a supplementary damage to boost our damage up by a total of 5% for one sigil slot, which is super efficient. That's just kind of how wide we have to go. And obviously, if you're not going to be like me and you don't want to run Flight over Fight because you're not a noob, there you go. It's another supplementary damage slot for you. So, oh yeah, and the most important thing I was going to talk about is that Fearless Spirit has gone way up in value, especially if you're running Flight over Fight. So I was actually misinformed by myself in the past with how Fearless Spirit worked, and I don't really know how I did this to myself, but I always thought Fearless Spirit was bad because we already capped too easily. But now that I'm running with Flight over Fight, and now that I've seen how hard it is to actually cap rotor in a non-training dummy scenario, I'm realizing that the 20% multiplier on Fearless Spirit is actually at the very end, as far as I can tell, of all the multipliers. So it's not like a plus 20% that gets reduced down by diminishing returns. It's a true 20% multiplier that happens at the very end of all the calculations, which really helps you hit that rotor cap. And again, you can see in the gameplay in the background, with Lucilius, I'm not hitting cap on rotor, I think, but if I am or I'm getting close, it's because of the combo booster imbue I have on my weapon and Fearless Spirit helping me bump up my damage from running Flight over Fight, because my damage is still pretty good despite having Flight over Fight. Obviously, I only have one supplementary damage, and that's kind of a damage down, but even the singular supplementary damage is where the majority of the bonus from that sigil is coming from. So again, my philosophy on how the captain's going to be played, if you don't want to play her in this very like cozy defensive Flight over Fight or Line Sway and Lucilius, feel free to not do that. I'm personally taking Flight over Fight off for like the older content because it's way easier. But again, Lucilius has a lot of stuff going on, and I want to turn my brain off while I'm doing it because I just want to farm, and so that's why I have it there. But yeah, TLDR, if you missed at the very beginning, the captain is totally fine. She won't be fine if they remove the rotor bug. If they nerf the rotor bug, the captain will be very bottom tier in my opinion. But as long as that's there, they are totally playable. Do not worry about your time into this character. They are still totally fine. So yeah, that'll be the video. Thanks for watching. And I think this patch, I guess in the end, was very good. I think Lucilius is kind of mind-numbing at certain points, but it's way better than farming Proto Bahamut or Piade, so I'll take it. Anyways, see you guys next time. Have a good day or night wherever you are. And I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.